Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this week in 1978 that music history was forever changed because an experienced band that was formed by music industry veterans changed their lead singer. They never looked back, and the pop charts would never be the same. This band was, of course, Journey, and Journey had already produced three really high quality albums up until this point. The first one was a self titled album from 1975, and it had the core lineup of Greg Raleigh on keyboards and lead vocals, he of Santana fame. There was Neil Schon, also of Santana fame, Ross Valerie on bass, and the great multi talented Ainsley Dunbar on drums. And the style of the album was a very jazz influenced, sort of progressive rock fusion album. Really, really interesting stuff. Did it chart? Not so much. Another equally good album came the following year, Look Into the Future, the same core lineup, minus, of course, a short lived member of Journey, but an important person in the formative years, a guy called George Tinker. But now we're down to just the core lineup. A great album. Definitely listen to it and check it out. And that was followed appropriately by Next in 1977. Now, all three albums were loved by the band's hardcore fan base, and they were doing some really interesting stuff. Was it jazz fusion? Was it progressive rock? Was it this sort of West Coast proto AOR sound? It was a bit of all of that. But Greg Raleigh, while he had had success in Santana singing such songs as Black Magic Woman, they decided that they needed a sort of standalone, charismatic frontman. And in their search for such a person, they found a man who was arguably the finest frontman in the history of all modern music. And this man was, of course, none other than Steve Perry. And his talents on this album were apparent straight away. The opening track, Lights, was a real sort of crowd pleaser. It was then, and it is now. And it really solidified the fact that this guy can sing. Wheel in the Sky, another big hit from the album. Feeling that way on any time, and anytime, sort of two songs that go together. Ross Gregg and Steve split their vocal duties on that, but it was quite clear from this moment forward that the band had got their lead singer, and they continued going from strength to strength. It was from around this era that the band appeared on public television in Chicago, playing a full set of their own music, plus a jam session with some of the best leading lights of the Chicago blues scene. It's all up there on YouTube. You should really check it out to see just how powerful and how versatile this band was, and just how perfect they were. They were a band that had honed their skills on the road, and then Steve Perry, with the voice that God gave him, just doing his thing. Now, this album was pivotal not only for Journey, but it was pivotal for FM radio and for rock music that was designed for pop audiences, moreover, because it proved that virtuosic rock musicians with a pedigree in progressive music and in jamming and in great songwriting could generally keep their musical ethos intact and hit it big with pop audiences that maybe that same year were listening, pardon me, to the likes of Helen Reddy or the Carpenters or Elton John. Now, this was really one of the seminal moments in AOR, album-oriented rock. And Journey weren't alone. At the same time, groups like Foreigner emerged, groups like Boston emerged, REO Speedwagon, who were a bit obscure in terms of their early releases, hit it stratospheric. And you could argue that, well, so many great vocalists, Lou Gramm, for instance, such great vocalist, Steve Perry, possibly the most iconic singer of the AOR genre, if you could only point to one, even though there were quite a few who were very good. And this was an interesting moment because while punk was going on in the UK, and while things like Boney M were going on in Germany, in North America and Japan, and eventually the entire world, audiences were cluing in to this AOR format that really represented an era of musical maturity obscurity in rock, insofar as you could make rock music that was equally pleasing to hardcore rock audiences who, were listening to your Zeppelins and your Sabbaths, but it was also not only palatable, but embraced and beloved by pop audiences. And that was really the genius of AOR. For all the people like to say it was corporate, it was actually one of the least corporate styles of music because the music was written by and performed by, and in most cases produced by musicians themselves who very much believed in their craft and who had honed it after many years of playing in smaller bands or as session musicians, or in Steve Perry's case, in relative obscurity before a band that had this kind of pedigree picked him up. It was a winning formula from both an artistic perspective and from the perspective of commercial popularity. And I don't see any sacrifice of integrity implicit in that. And you could argue it was a golden age of modern rock pop music in that regard. And in many ways, this album was ground zero for that genre because these great musicians found, these great instrumentalists, I should say, found their perfect match with a God-given vocal talent who himself was incredibly musical in the way he sung. I said on an earlier video that Steve Perry uses his voice like an instrument. He is so aware of range, of octaves, of where to do what, the phrasing. Such a musical singer. And they went from strength to strength. They went on to become one of the biggest bands of all time. It just goes to show you, just because someone's obscure as a vocalist, or just because a band has their beginning and they don't sell huge on their first album, don't give up on them. Great things can happen. They sure did with Journey, and we're all happier for it. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.